Welcome to Newcastle Family History Society podcasts. The Newcastle Family History Society, located on Awabakal land in Newcastle, New South Wales, Australia, provides support for those interested in family history. Across the road from the Junction Public School in Newcastle once stood a small but mighty institution, a family-run pottery that shaped a community for more than a century. Founded in 1866 by English emigrant Moses Hughes, it became a cornerstone of the community, employing generations of the same family, adapting through hardship and change, and leaving a lasting mark on the city's landscape. Society member Mari Hughes tells the story of Hughes Potteries, a family concern.
As a member of the Hughes family, I have developed a keen interest in the history of Hughes Potteries. The pottery was established in November 1866 as Hughes and Jury, Newcastle and Burwood Fire Clay and Brickworks. By 1877, it was one of 7 brickworks operating on Dr. James Mitchell's Burwood estate in the Newcastle suburbs, now known as Merewether and the Junction. It began as a fire brick manufactory and quickly diversified to produce bricks and other building materials. By 1911, drain pipes and plumbing fittings became the main focus. The pottery was recognised by local builders and plumbers for the quality of the clay product it manufactured for building construction and drainage purposes. There are few potteries in New South Wales that remained operational as a family-owned and family-managed business for over 100 years. However, Hughes Potteries at 1 Hopkins Street, the Junction, achieved this success. As the 3 great-granddaughter of the founder, Moses Hughes, I grew up in Merewether and have both a family and local history interest in Hughes Potteries. I call myself a pottery Hughes to distinguish my family ancestry from the numerous Hughes families that settled in the Newcastle and Hunter region. My father, Herbert Hughes, worked at the pottery as a burner, and his family home was part of the pottery complex. In spite of this familiarity, it was only in 2001, when I began family history research, that I came to learn something of the pottery's rich history. By interweaving my research into our family with the study of the pottery industry in the Newcastle region, I have come to a deeper appreciation of the unique contribution that Hughes Potteries has made to this industry. Moses Hughes was an interesting character. He was born in 1802 in Stourbridge, an area of Staffordshire renowned for the quality of fire bricks and also glassmaking. At the age of 61, Moses emigrated to Australia, arriving in Melbourne aboard the Clipper White Star in September 1863. His wife Elizabeth, 59, and his adult children, William, 31, Moses, 28, Hannah, 24, Samuel, 22, and his granddaughter, Hannah Hughes Martin, 16, arrived in Melbourne 2 months later aboard the steamship Great Victoria. The family's early years in the colony were very unsettled. Initially, the family moved to Natai, now called Mittagong, to support Moses's older son, Enoch, 34, who was manager of the struggling Fitzroy Ironworks. Enoch had come to Australia in 1857 and quickly involved himself in brickmaking and iron production. His tenure as manager at these works was short-lived, and in spite of family help, his failure to complete the erection of the blast furnace led to him being discharged of his position in April 1864. The family next moved to Sydney, when in October 1864, Moses leased allotments in Balmain and set about developing the site to operate the first fire brick works in the colony of New South Wales. Trading as Moses Hughes and Son at Balmain Fire Clay and Brickworks, Moses struggled financially and in August 1865 was declared insolvent. The family remained in Sydney, and it is assumed that Moses and his sons, Moses Jr. and Samuel, continued to find work as brickmakers. Moses' youngest son, Samuel, my two-great-grandfather, married Annie MacDonald in Sydney on the 27th of November 1865, and their first son, Edward, was born on the 16th of September 1866 at Glebe, Sydney. This child sadly died 2 months later in Newcastle on the 25th of November 1866. These dates confirm the family's move to Newcastle in October-November 1866. When a band of quality fire clay was found along the coal seam of the Burwood mines, Moses inspected the site and was impressed with the clay's suitability for the manufacture of fire bricks. Despite a lack of financial capital following his insolvency proceedings, this find of fire clay gave Moses the opportunity for a new beginning. He formed a partnership with James Jury and moved to Newcastle in late 1866 to establish Newcastle and Burwood Fire Clay and Brickworks, more commonly known as Hughes and Jury. Little is known about James Jury, but it is assumed that he provided the financial backing to enable Moses to set up the pottery. He was supported in the works by his sons Moses Jr. and Samuel. The preliminary buildings of sheds and mills, etc., for the new works began in October 1866 on a half-acre site leased from Dr. James Mitchell, close to the Burwood line of railway. The Newcastle Chronicle on the 19th of November described the site as having a circular kiln under construction, a large drying shed 80 feet long by 17 feet wide, capable of housing 15,000 bricks, a crushing mill, and a well of water, the sinking of which involved considerable labour. The actual manufacture of bricks commenced on the 5th of November. The fire bricks made at these works were equal in quality and at least half the cost of the imported article. This was a boom for the newly established furnace-based industries. Customers included the Sydney Glass Works, Hunter River Copper Works, Burwood Newcastle Smelting Works, and the Sydney Mint. Hughes and Jury dissolved their partnership in May 1872. Moses purchased the rights of Jury in the business for £300, and this included the leasehold of the property. The plant, equipment, buildings, the horse mill, stone and potter's mill all reverted to Moses. He then traded under the name Hughes' Newcastle Pottery, Fire Bricks and Tile Works. Products produced at the works included, among others, drain pipes, chimney pots, checkered paving tiles, fire bricks, fire lumps, oven tiles and garden border tiles. Moses Hughes died from chronic bronchitis on the 22nd of March 1879, aged 77, having eventually established a successful pottery business. He was buried in Christchurch Cathedral grounds, Newcastle. His wife Elizabeth died a year later on the 5th of May 1880 and was buried with her husband. In his will, Moses left the pottery to his fifth and youngest son, Samuel. Samuel and his wife Annie had settled at the Junction in the family home erected opposite the pottery works. They had 3 surviving children: Henry William, born in 1867, Francis James, also known as Joe, born 1869, and Elizabeth Ann, born in 1872. Almost immediately, Samuel began to modernise the plant. By 1881, he had built a new kiln and installed a 14-horsepower steam engine to power a new pipe mill which was needed to meet a greatly increased business demand. Further expansion was reported in June 1887 and February 1888, when on both occasions Samuel invited a large number of influential citizens and the press to inspect the improvements to the works. Samuel also took these opportunities to boast about his achievements since taking over the management of the pottery. He claimed that he had sold more stuff in 12 months than his father had sold in 13 years. He had begun with £100 capital on his own account, and in 8 years had invested £12,000 in purchasing new machinery and improving the plant. He had secured government contracts for the whole of the northern districts of New South Wales and 19 municipalities. While all seemed rosy for Samuel at this time, his actions in the following years show a restless and unsettled spirit. Firstly, in June 1888, a prospectus of works advertised in the Newcastle Morning Herald and Miners' Advocate indicated Samuel's intention to form a company under the Companies Act to be named the Great Northern Pottery, Fire Brick and Pottery Works, with the intention to purchase the pottery works at the Junction with a capital of £12,000 in 12,000 shares of £1 each. In spite of guaranteeing a dividend of 10% per annum, this venture was unsuccessful. Next, in March 1889, the Burwood Pottery Works were advertised to be sold by auction Friday, March 29 at 3 o'clock on account of the proprietor leaving for England early next month. The sale obviously did not succeed, and from incidental reports, it is believed that Samuel's return to England did not eventuate either. The next venture, in May 1893, was the calling for tenders to dismantle the pottery works at the Junction and re-erect them in Hamilton. Another misguided dream. The boom times in the building industry came to a sudden end with the Great Depression of the 1890s. This had devastating effects for brickmaking in the Newcastle district, as described by Joseph Bartell in the Newcastle Morning Herald in November 1895. He said, 6 years ago, I gave full employment to 35 hands. It's all gone now, as one kiln of bricks has supplied my trade for 4 months. He added, a little further along Morgan Street, Merriweather, Mr. Samuel Hughes has a nice, prosperous brickmaking and drain pipe producing plant. 6 years ago, employment was found for 40 men and boys, but today the demand is met by Mr. Hughes and members of his own family with the help of an occasional hand or two. In 1895, Samuel was forced to take out a mortgage for £1,150 to enable the business to continue to trade. Even with this unsettled situation, Hughes Pottery survived on its original site at the Junction. Samuel Hughes died on the 9th of June 1900, aged 59. The cause of death was stomach cancer. He is buried in the Roman Catholic Cemetery at Sandgate. He was survived by his wife Anne, also known as Teresa Ann, and his sons Henry and Francis, and his daughter Elizabeth Ann. In his will, Samuel gave, devised and bequeathed all his real and personal estate to his wife Anne Hughes, with the provision to carry on the business until her death. A biographical entry for Samuel Hughes was published in Who Was Who in the Hunter Valley Towns in 1888. Samuel's death marked the close of the pottery's founding era, a time when its owners and managers hailed from Staffordshire, where they had learned their brickmaking trade. The period from 1900 to 1927 is a time of change, and I give it the title Trading on the Legacy of the Founders. While Moses and Samuel had been good at using the press to advertise and promote their business, there is limited material from this source after 1900. Without the drive and initiative of the founders, and with the large investment in the works in 1887 to 1888, the period from 1900 to 1927 could be described as a time of consolidation. It was also a time when the proprietor of the business was a female member of the Hughes family. Shortly after Samuel's death, Anne Hughes placed an advertisement in the Newcastle Morning Herald assuring builders, contractors and others that the business of her late husband would be carried on by her, as usual, and all orders would be promptly attended to. Initially, Samuel's eldest son, Henry, is believed to be manager of the works. He, however, experienced a great loss when his wife, Ellen, née Hickey, died in 1901, leaving Henry with 3 young sons to care for, Richard Samuel, 10, Francis James, 8, and William Henry, 3. In about 1904, Alexander Mackenzie, Moses's great-grandson, became manager, a position he held until his retirement in 1929. Alex was the son of Hannah Hughes Martin, who had been reared after her mother's death by Moses and Elizabeth. Alex had worked at the pottery prior to serving with the New South Wales Lancers in the Boer War. His father, John Robert Mackenzie, an engineer, had worked with Samuel in developing the works in the 1880s and is credited with constructing new kilns and the tall chimney that became a junction landmark. The reason for this change in management could be linked to a story often told by my father, Herb Hughes. It relates to a time when the pottery lost several government contracts because Samuel's sons, Henry and Joe, went on a drinking spree and failed to place tenders by the correct time, thus losing valuable trade. While no dates are known for this incident, it would appear that it occurred about 1903, and as a result, Anne placed the management in the hands of Alex Mackenzie because she recognised his proven management skills. Henry and Joe continued to work at the pottery as moulders. From a photo passed down from Alex Mackenzie, we know that there was at least one major brick order during the early 1900s. This was to supply decorative white bricks for the interior of Newcastle's Christ Church Cathedral. However, the main focus of the business after 1900 was the manufacture of drain pipes and associated fittings as municipalities developed improved drainage and sewerage systems. Samuel's wife Anne died in 1911, aged 67. Her death certificate and other documents give her name as Teresa Ann. She is buried with Samuel at Sandgate. In her will, Teresa left the pottery and family home to her daughter, Elizabeth Ann, for and during the term of her life, with the provision that upon her death, the real and personal property were to be sold. In leaving the pottery to her daughter, Teresa ensured that the pottery stayed in family ownership and provided employment for her sons and the next generation of family members. From affidavits included in Teresa's probate package, we learn that the pottery's machinery had not been updated since the major expansion of the works in the late 1880s, and that the stock included drain pipes, junctions, bends, and other items associated with plumbing requirements. Besides the improved property at the junction, a clay pit was leased at Adamstown. As proprietor, Elizabeth Ann, known by family members as Auntie Annie, relied heavily on Alexander Mackenzie to manage both the works and the business aspects of the pottery. Anecdotal comments from family members who knew her also indicated that she wielded significant power in the operation of the works and in family matters. It was in 1924 that we note the first formal complaint from 8 ratepayers of Merewether in regard to smoke and soot from the pipe kilns. Council at that stage commented that they had no power to act because the nuisance for us to deal with must affect all the king's subjects. Elizabeth Ann died in 1927, aged 55. Teresa's will had stipulated that the pottery was to be sold on Elizabeth's death and the proceeds given in the following proportions: 1/4 to Alexander Mackenzie and the remaining 3/4 to be equally divided between her 2 sons, 3 grandsons and a granddaughter. However, the pottery was not sold. It is not known why or who made the decision to form a company, but most likely it was to ensure the continuing employment of family members in a family-managed business. Hughes Potteries Limited was formed in November 1927 with a nominal capital of £15,000 divided into 15,000 shares of £1. The founding members of the company were Alexander Mackenzie, Henry Hughes, Francis Hughes Sr., my grandfather Francis Hughes Jr., William Hughes, Francis's daughter Muriel Kennedy, and Alex's wife Frances Mackenzie, who had purchased the shares allocated to Henry's eldest son, Richard Samuel Hughes, who was killed in action at Passchendaele, Belgium in 1917. The Articles of Association stated that the managing director was to be appointed with the qualification that he held 500 shares in the company. An amendment in 1930 to Article 38 reads, "No share shall be transferred to a person who is not a member so long as any member is willing to purchase the same at an equivalent price." This amendment guaranteed that Hughes family members both owned and managed the company until its closure in 1981. In 1937, under the New South Wales Company Act of 1936, the business was incorporated as Hughes Potteries Proprietary Limited. Alex Mackenzie, the first managing director, retired in 1929 and was replaced by Henry's son, William, or Bill Hughes. Bill's sudden death in 1936 at the age of 39 left a significant vacuum in leadership. Tom Cunningham, a worker and shareholder, filled the role until 1940, when Henry's son, by his second marriage, Leslie Arthur Hughes, became works manager. Les became managing director in 1950, a position he held until his retirement in 1978. Les' son Stuart Hughes took over from his father and oversaw the closure of the pottery in 1981. While my grandfather Francis did not work at the pottery, he was chair of the meeting of directors for many years and as such assisted in the management of the works. While the pottery stayed in operation until 1981, there are some questions about the profitability of the company. A profit and loss statement dated the 9th of March 1930 showed a profit of £333 for 1928 to 1930, and that there had been no distribution of profits to shareholders. 6 years later, the £1 share had decreased in value to 5 shillings. In 1950, the share value was 7 shillings and sixpence. No dividends had been paid since 1941, and accumulated losses to June 1949 amounted to £1,334. The need to upgrade the plant to meet new environmental standards meant that any significant profits were reinvested in the works. During the 1940s and 50s, there were numerous complaints from the public and the Greater Newcastle Council in regard to noise and soot and smoke emissions. In 1940, the headmaster of the Junction Public School complained that hundreds of times each day the voices of children and teachers are drowned by the noise, which renders real concentration most difficult. The complaints in regard to pollution were accentuated by the fact that the decades-old pottery works were now situated in an area zoned for residences and was considered a non-conforming development in a residential area. In order to keep the pottery operational and to meet the requirements of stricter pollution controls, major improvements were made over the years to reduce the level of emissions and to improve working conditions. Electrification of machinery in the 1940s meant that the steam boiler could be removed and more modern machinery purchased to improve production. Another area of concern was the shabby conditions of buildings. The family home and offices, erected in the 1870s, had been allowed to fall into disrepair. For me personally, this residence has many happy childhood memories of time spent with my grandfather and his family. An eyesore maybe, but for children, a great place to play. In 1951, an order was sought for the buildings to be demolished. Council members inspected the property in May 1951 and made the recommendation. Since, in its opinion, the premises are unsightly and dilapidated and a danger to the public, a notice is to be served to the owners to repair or demolish them within 3 months. The buildings were demolished in 1953 and a new office building was erected on the site. The first stoker-fired kiln was commissioned in 1965, with the second coming into operation the following year. These kilns not only increased the yield of first-grade pipes per firing, but successfully cut emissions. For my father, Herb Hughes, who was chief burner and who had worked at the pottery since his teens, these improvements lightened his workload in the final years before retirement. In 1970, a new shed was built to enclose the entire works. All these improvements, though, could not stop the pottery's eventual closure. In 1974, Ordinance 46 of the New South Wales Local Government Act was amended to provide the option of installing PVC piping from homes to the sewerage main. As plastics were much lighter, less expensive and easier to install, plumbers soon changed to this new product and the earthenware pipe market quickly collapsed. The Hunter District Water Board, however, was more cautious and conducted extensive tests before giving approval for the use of PVC piping for underground use. When this approval was given in 1981, production at Hughes Potteries ceased and plans were set in place to demolish the plant. A feature of the demolition of the pottery was the felling of the significant Junction landmark, the 20-metre chimney stack that had been erected by Alex Mackenzie's father in 1887. Explosives could not be used to demolish this tall structure because of its closeness to nearby houses and telephone cables. The base of the chimney was chipped away and wire ropes were attached to a bulldozer to pull the chimney down. After 3 hours and 17 attempts, the chimney finally surrendered to the efforts of the demolition crew. In November 1981, the pottery site was auctioned for $425,000, a far cry from the predicted $1 million. It was purchased by the Stronach Group. 17 townhouses called the Potteries were built on the site, bounded by Railway, Union and Hopkins Streets. In 1986, the remaining parcel of land, bounded by Hopkins, Union and Merriweather Streets, was purchased by the New South Wales State Government for the construction of 24 one-bedroom pensioner apartments. In recognition of the heritage of the site, the tenants group named this area Hughes Court. This brief history of Hughes Potteries shows that throughout its 115 years, it faced many challenges, but succeeded in remaining a family-owned and family-managed business operating on its original site at the junction. The knowledge and skill of working with clay, which the founders learned in the Staffordshire district of England, was passed down through successive generations of Australian-born family members who learned their trade through on-the-job training. Over the years, the pottery provided employment for 6 generations of the Hughes family. I have often asked the question as to why Hughes Potteries continue to operate when many similar firms closed or formed mergers with larger companies. I believe a major factor was the commitment of family members who formed the core of the workforce and who took great pride in the skill and craftsmanship involved in manufacturing quality clay pipes and associated products.
For more than 100 years, Hughes Potteries stood as proof that craftsmanship and community can go hand in hand. From fire bricks to drain pipes, from one family's dream to a local landmark, its story reminds us that the things we build, and the people who build them, live on long after the fires go out. For Mari Hughes, the three great-granddaughter of founder Moses Hughes, this story isn't just history, it's family, a legacy passed down through generations of hard-working potters who left their mark, one pipe and one brick at a time. Join us again for more local and family history stories on Newcastle Family History Society podcasts.